Okay, everyone, we're having a little bit of technical issues right now with Kell and with lagging. So we are going to start the intro, give Kell some time to pop in, and we will hopefully get the show started. Thank you for your patience. Good afternoon, or good morning, or good evening, wherever you are in the world. I am Michael, the co host of Paranormal Versus. We are experiencing a little bit of issues with Kel. She's rebooting her computer, so hopefully there won't be any lagging or delays with her. But in the meantime, I would like to introduce our guest, the very cool and awesome Colin Saunders. How are you?
I'm good, thank you, Michael, and thank you for inviting me onto your podcast. So if you're ready, Michael, I'll
Sure. Why don't you
go
tell
straight
us a
into it.
little bit about your background?
Okay, first thing to say really is that I had no interest in UFOs at the time of the sighting. I wasn't looking for a UFO. It was just something that happened along the way. Now, my working career, I believe, is quite interesting, and it has a bearing on the sighting. I've spent my whole life as a draftsman, as an electrical design draftsman. So I've always drawn for a living. I'm 65 now, and I've been drawing since the age of 16, since I left school. Back in 1992, I was AutoCAD User of the Year here in the UK for a project that I did with Courtaulds. And I worked in many different countries and different projects. Notably, I've worked in the aircraft industry. I worked on the Airbus in Germany when I was just a young lad of 21. We worked in Hamburg. We worked on the fuselage there as a draftsman, design draftsman. And I also spent a couple of years in Sweden working for Saab Aerospace. I worked on a civilian aircraft, the SF-340 as it was called. I also worked for Chevron Petroleum in the North Sea. I spent a year in Aberdeen. Now that was an interesting job because there was a lot of helicopter flights out to the platforms, a lot of aviation experience. So my whole working career has been technical, and it's all been revolving around doing drawings, electrical drawings. So when it came to the actual sighting, the experience, I was well placed to make notes of what I saw mentally, and then that night get back and start drawing the craft and eventually start building scale models. Now this occurred in 1999, the 31st of March 1999. We'd been out for a meal. We'd been out for a bar meal in the countryside to a small pub called the White Lion in Paleton. There were 2 carloads. I was in the car, my wife was driving. I got my mother-in-law on board. It was her birthday that day, and my daughter was there as well. The second car was my brother-in-law with his French partner and her grandma and granddad, who had come over for the week to spend some time in England with their granddaughter. So the 2 carloads of us went off to this public house in the middle of nowhere, basically, a little country village called Paleton, which is in Warwickshire. We had the bar meal and we left at 9:50 p.m. And as we got into the car, I remember as we were driving away, my wife was driving, I looked around and I seen the old lady struggling to get into the second vehicle, the Range Rover, and my brother-in-law was helping her into the car. So we set off ahead of them, assuming that they would catch us up along the route. Now, we went through the countryside until we came up to an old road called the Foss Way. This is an ancient Roman road. It's a dead straight road. It's in the middle of the countryside. There's no street lights. There's no villages. There's no nothing. It's just pitch black. And as we came up to the Foss Way, somebody actually said, well, we're turning onto the Foss now. And my daughter said, oh, there's been talk of headless horsemen down here. We all laughed. So we'll keep our eyes open for him. And as soon as we turned the corner, there were these lights hovering by the side of the road. Now, these, I have to say, Michael, these were the brightest lights I've ever seen in my life. They were like laser show, these red and white all mingled up together. It was incredible to see. And it was exactly half a mile away, because I went back and measured the distance the next day. So we drove towards these lights, talking about them, all excited, saying there's too many lights for an aeroplane and it's too low, too many lights for a helicopter, etc. There's never any lights on top of pylons or anything like that along the Foss Way. So we drove towards these lights, all excited, talking about what they could be, until we were parallel with the lights. And I would say that we was 100 feet away from these lights. Now, I based that 100 feet on steering a friend of mine's narrowboat boat around the Ashby Canal, which is 70 foot long. So when I say 100 feet, I mean 100 feet. I could have hit it with a cricket ball. But as we stopped and stared at these lights, there was no actual craft. There was just these lights, which was incredible. And at the back, there were four, nearest to us, there were four big red lights that were at an angle to the earth. They weren't parallel to the earth. They were tilted up at an angle, four big red lights. And these lights, they look like they've got a crisscross effect on them. I think that was due to the light that's being emitted from the round circles themselves, whether they were portholes or not, I don't know, but it looked like it was something along the lines of Newton's law of ring interference, where the beams were interacting with each other and causing a crisscross pattern. It wasn't etched onto a plastic cover that covered these rear lights. So as I'm staring at these lights, I'm staring at one in particular, all of a sudden I noticed that the sky is sort of starting to ripple around the lights. And for the first time I thought, there's something there. There's something around the lights holding them together. It's not just balls of light in the sky. And at the moment I thought that, this craft decloaked. I mean, it just became a metallic solid object. It was just like watching Star Trek, you know, where the Klingon ships decloak. It was just like that. It was incredible to see. As soon as it decloaked, it then started to float. Now, the rear end of the craft stayed where it was. The craft was so close to the ground, if it had tilted from the middle, it would have struck the ground. I'll get this little model here to show you what I mean. So this is the craft, and it is tilted at an angle to the earth, like so. If it had tilted from the rear end, from the middle, I believe the bottom would have struck the ground. It was that close to the ground. So the rear end stayed where it was, and the nose rose up in the air. It rose in the air like a submarine underwater. It just floated. It was just incredible to see the way that it moved. I've never seen any craft move like that. And it was totally silent. It's the size of a house. I'd probably say the base of it was probably the size of a bus, 30 feet, that sort of thing, 30, 40 feet from tip to tip. Also, as it materialized, there was these little fluffy white clouds that appeared around the bottom wingtips, which I assume was vaporization. Now, this had quite a stunning effect on me, I have to say. After working in the aircraft industry and being a draftsman all my life, I hadn't anything like this before, and this absolutely blew me away. Now, there is a little bit more to it than that, but what I'd like to do, if you don't mind, Michael, is just to talk about the nuts and bolts. That's what I did for the first 20 years, and then I shall come back to the paranormal things that occurred, come back to the high strangeness, because this thing, the paranormal world, is connected with this UFO, and I've realised that through the experience that we had, especially what I had with my family that night. So once the craft had materialised and floated up in front of us, my wife, the driver, decided to pull forward and reverse into a gateway so we could get out of the car. Now, the problem was when she drove forward, there was a big hedge and it blocked the view. And I thought to myself, if it's going to go, it's going to go now. So we reversed into the gateway, jumped out of the car. Sure enough, it had gone. And there was no smell of any aviation fuel. There was no thermal signature. There was nothing. In fact, it was total silence. You could hear a pin drop. There was nothing around at all. No cars on the road, no other aircraft around. Well, there was one. So we stood there and we looked around, and in the distance was this huge craft disappearing. Now, I've been to a few air shows. I know what aircraft are like. I've worked in the aircraft industry. I've never seen anything quite like this triangle that was going away, but we could only see the rear end of it. But again, it got 4 red lights in the back of it, just the same as a small one we'd seen hovering over the gateway in the field. So we assume that the small one went back to the large one, but we didn't see that happen, so we don't actually know. So we just stood there and watched this large triangle go away from us. We got back in the car. It was so exciting. We checked a watch. It was 9:50 p.m. Got back in the car and we drove back home. Now, the strange thing was that my brother-in-law lived next door to me, mother-in-law. And when we got back, we were taking the mother-in-law back home. Lo and behold, the Range Rover was already there. My brother-in-law got back before us, and it was out of the vehicle and inside the house. So somehow they passed us along the way without seeing the UFO. That has always been a bit of an enigma. We don't know how that actually occurred. So that was basically the sighting. We got back home and immediately started producing drawings. My daughter and myself drew the triangle. And now I was in the position at the time when I was running my own business and I was working from home, and I've got 4 members of staff working for me. It was getting a bit cozy at home. It was about the time we needed to move out into a factory. But it gave me the opportunity to stop work and to concentrate on the UFO, because it just blew my mind seeing that craft that night. So I started building models. Initially, I drew the craft, and then I started building some paper models. And then I built a wooden model. I got some doweling and printed some drawings and produced my first triangular 3D model. Now, the funny thing was that craft was stolen. That was in my van that I had parked on the driveway of the house that I was using for my business. And one night there was a break-in to the van and somebody stole the old cassette player. And later on I found out they'd also stolen the model as well, because I've looked for that model for the last few years. It never turned up. I've moved house a few times. Whoever stole the cassette player also stole the first model, which seemed really odd to me, and why somebody would want to do that. And also a friend of mine said that the vehicle had been professionally broken into by the way they'd removed the lock from the door. So I got the feeling that somebody was after the model rather than the cassette player. So what I did then, I decided to build another model, but this time get a battery pack and some LEDs and wire it up. So this was the next model that I made. Okay, so this one, like I say, I put some LEDs into the corners. Now, we never saw the bottom of the craft. We only ever saw the rear of the craft. And the craft, like I say, was tilted at an angle to the earth. When the craft materialised and then floated up, when the nose floated into the air, you can see all these beams on the surface, these girders that are interlocking. Plus, this grey surface was like liquid. It looked like liquid nitrogen. It looked like it got little waves going up and down the surface of the craft. So built this model, and with this model I managed to get onto television a few times and show people what we saw that night, which were in relief. I was sent a drawing of a Belgium sighting of a triangle. Now the Belgium sighting looked like this, and it got the same lines in relief on the bottom of the craft that we saw on the top of the craft. So I decided to take the Belgium sighting to make the bottom of my model and use our own sighting of the rear and the top to make a complete 3D model of the craft we saw that night. Now this was good, but I couldn't get the lines off the surface in 3D, in relief. And then one day a friend of mine came to me and said he just bought a 3D printer and he wanted to make a model of my UFO. So this is what he produced. This is the first model that we produced. It comes with lights and batteries, and this time, as you can see, it's got these beams actually raised up off the surface. You can see there, that's a good shot of it. Now this was brilliant, and I was really pleased that he made this for me, but it still didn't show like the liquid surface, which was a different colour, and the beams were a different colour to the main body. So I came up with an idea that if we sold some of these on eBay, because he'd got the files and he'd printed these, it took him some time, if we sold enough, would you make me a large model that was more of an exact copy of what we saw that night? So over the course of a couple of years, I did that, and we ended up with this. Now, this is the final model that we've produced. And let's put the lights on this one. Now, this, as far as I'm concerned, is pretty much an exact copy of an alien triangle. So when we came upon the craft, it was tilted at an angle like this. The lights have got this like 3D effect, which you can't quite see, the crisscross effect on the camera there. But this time we've got the beams on the surface in silver, which is how they looked on the night. And we've also got like a liquid effect on the surface of this craft. I don't know if you can quite pick that up on the camera there. You can just see it on the brows there. So, and then there's a central white core down the craft that the top and the bottom are rolled over onto. It's this central white core, the top and the bottom join onto this central milky white core. And like I say, the bottom is based on the Belgium sighting because it's got the same lines in relief, but our sighting is based on the rear and the top of the craft that we saw that night. So, armed with this model, I decided to go and do a presentation at a UFO conference early on this year. And it was there that somebody said to me, why don't you write a book about your experience? Now, over the last 24 years, I've had a lot of people contact me with their own experience of triangles. I collected all of those up, and I did have it in mind to write a book one day, but I was going to wait until I retired. But with the guy I met there, Philip Kinsella, his name was, he sort of suggested I write a book, and I just got on with it and just did it. And I've ended up writing a book, which really surprised me. I've ever managed to do that. But the book I've written, Triangular UFOs of the United Kingdom, it covers over 130 different close encounters with triangles, just purely triangles and triangles of the United Kingdom. And it's amazing to find so many people who have had a similar experience to myself. Now, that's sort of the nuts and bolts of what took place that night and what's taken place over the next few years. But there is another side to all of this, which is really strange. And I'm sure you're going to enjoy this one, Michael. So after 20 years of just talking about the nuts and bolts, I decided to start talking about the strange thing that happened that night. So what occurred was basically when the craft materialized, we'll take this craft again, and it floated into the air. As it floated up into the air, all of a sudden, it was just like somebody got a pair of binoculars and put them in front of my eyes, because I could see the surface close up like this, and I could see the beams interlocking just like that. Then from that view, there was another view, and it was this. It was the nose, the big round nose. And it was so close, I couldn't see the beams underneath. I could only just see the big round nose, and the way it had been manufactured, it was amazing. It was beautiful to look at. And then this, a side view that showed the milky white central core, and it showed the top and the bottom of the triangle rolling over like a hovercraft skin, or the pie on the edge of a pastry, or the pastry on the edge of a pie, sorry. And they interlocked on this central white core. Then the next thing I remember is being like in the car saying, stop, I want to get out. So I had these three close views of the triangle. Now, I assumed the next day that with all the excitement and everything that took place, that I'd had an out-of-body experience. That was the only way I could describe what I'd seen or how I'd seen it, by getting so close to the craft. I never left the car, I know that. None of us got out of the car. There was no abduction or anything like that. However, there was these three close-up views placed in my mind. Now, like I say, for quite a long time, probably for the best part of 20 years, I thought that this was an out-of-body experience. But back in the early days, I was meeting quite a few people here in the UK at a conference in Leeds that we used to have, the UFO conference. And we had quite a lot of good speakers over that I managed to talk to, like Dr. Roger Lear and Stanton Freeman. But more importantly, I got to meet Bud Hopkins. Now, the late Bud Hopkins, I only got to speak to him for like 2 minutes. There was a queue of people wanting to chat to him. I told Bob about the experience, the triangle. I told him about the out-of-body experience. Now, he said to me, No, it wasn't about out-of-body experience. What happened there was you had images placed in your mind. That was telepathy from the aliens on board the craft. Now, this was the early days, and with me not being involved with the UFO world so much and then just starting to learn, I didn't really think that was the correct thing. I just wondered why that had occurred. Like, I didn't think it was telepathy at that point. Now, along the way, I'd been learning a lot about UFOs and about the fact that they do use telepathy. And I've been listening to a lot of David Jacobs' work, where he's dealt with a lot of abductees. Now, what he was saying was that telepathy is not just, I always thought it'd be voices going backwards and forwards. But David Jacobs talks about the fact that images are placed into people's minds. And that makes sense, because an image paints 1,000 words. Then all of a sudden, I had an email out of the blue from a guy in America, and this would be about 4 or 5 years ago. And it started off by saying, just like you, I had images placed in my mind during a close encounter with a triangle. And he went on to describe how this triangle came down really close to him, the same as we'd had. And then he'd had these 3 really close detailed images placed into his mind. 2 of them were the parts of the outside of the craft, and he thinks one of them was actually inside the craft. And it was that point there that the sort of penny dropped, and I thought, yes, Bud Hopkins was right all along. It wasn't an out-of-body experience. It was images placed in my mind. It seemed to make a lot of sense then once I realised that, once I took that on board, because I've been a draftsman all my life, I've always dealt with images. So it makes sense that images were placed in my mind to help me build the model. There were close-up views of the craft. Now also, after the event, over the next 18 months to 2 years, I was starting to get other paranormal experiences. I was getting like ghostly things happen and other UFOs and strange orbs and all sorts of manner of things. Now I started to keep a list and the dates of these things that were going on, but nothing was happening to the other members of the car, to my daughter, my wife, or my mother-in-law. And I couldn't understand why it was just happening to me. Now, I did realise after one particular incident, when I was down at the river, when I had what I can only describe as an invisible creature walk in front of me, because I could hear the footsteps but not see the thing itself, whatever it was. I figured that, and it was really quite scary at the time, but I figured that was not here in this world, it was somewhere else. And all of these things are happening since the UFO. So they've obviously connected. And that was the day, Michael, that I knew, and I decided 100% that the triangle that we'd encountered was dimensional. This was not coming from another planet in our own solar system. Otherwise, after the encounter, it would have gone away and we would have had no more experiences, or I wouldn't have had any more experiences. But immediately after the UFO experience, I was starting to have all this other paranormal stuff occur. And that, like I say, went on for the best part of 18 months, 2 years. That has calmed down a lot now, I have to say. I don't see much anymore. I seem to have gone back to just being a normal human being, if you like, and not experiencing the things I experienced back in the early days. So once I started writing the book, I started asking all the witnesses if they'd had any other paranormal experiences. And, there were more people saying yes than no. So it just seemed that paranormal experiences, UFOs, they go hand in hand. I found out through the research that a lot of people have paranormal experiences as a child, and they have them throughout their lives, and it culminates in a UFO experience, in a close encounter. It seemed to be the other way around with me. It started with the UFO encounter, and then the weird paranormal stuff afterwards. As far as I can remember, I had nothing for the first 40 years of my life. But from the age of 40 onwards, I started to have, after the UFO experience, started to have other experiences. So for me, I am 100% convinced that these things are interdimensional. So I've put a whole chapter in the book that talks about people who have had these other experiences as well as triangle experiences. And that's where we've got to today, basically. 25 years of research and thinking about this, and it's culminated in the book that we've got out today. And that's pretty much my story, Michael.
Wow, that's quite a story. And I find what's interesting to me is having awareness of like our secret space program using triangular craft, none of them are described as having like the liquid metallic look, the wave on it, like you're describing. So when you said that, I was like, yeah, I definitely don't think that's one of ours. That that's one that we built because I don't see us having that kind of tech.
No, and also if that was one of ours, that you wouldn't go on to have other experiences. You would just see it and it would go away. Plus, during a close encounter like this, you know straight away that it's not from this world. It's difficult to say why, but you just know that everything is not normal about what's happening. It's like all of a sudden you're on a Hollywood film set. It's just absolutely incredible. I do wonder, like, because the next day we went down and it seemed impossible from where we turned the corner that we could have seen the craft so clearly, or the lights, because there were trees in the way and bushes and things. There's a feeling that like, almost the scenery was slightly different during the course of the encounter, because we did see it from when we turned the corner and right up until we drove in, more or less underneath it. It wasn't. But if we'd gone back the next day, if that had been a normal aircraft, we wouldn't have seen it. If it was a helicopter, we wouldn't have seen it quite so clear because there were trees and bushes and hedges in the way. So the whole thing was very, very strange.
I agree, and welcome, Cal.
Hello.
Hello, Cal.
Sorry I'm late.
I sound a lot better
just been
now.
listening.
Sounds like it's working okay.
Yeah, it took ages to update, and I don't know. I hope it's worked. But I've been watching while it's been updating, so yeah, I'm really interested in this. Definitely. I was going to ask you a question. Do you know how you said that like the area where it was that it happened? Did you ever go back and like have a look to see if there was anything there?
Yes, I went back several times, many times, especially on the anniversary. I'd always go back.
Right.
There was a gateway right next to where this was occurring. This is where my wife tried. Well, she did reverse into the gateway, but then it had disappeared. And right next to that, in the field where it was hovering, there was a stable with some horses in it. But we did ask around. There was a few little cat and dog places and farms, and we asked them if they'd seen anything. Nobody had seen anything. It was pretty much in the middle of nowhere. Nobody else was around. The funny thing was, though, after it had finished and it all stopped, all the cars started up again. There wasn't a vast amount of cars, but air traffic, it was almost like it was in a bubble of quietness for a short period of time before it came back to being normal again. It was a most surreal experience, I have to say. That's why I say you can tell straight away that it's not from this world once you have one of these close encounters. It's very mystical, shall we say, and spiritual.
Yeah.
I had the feeling, in fact, when the craft materialised and floated up, I had three thoughts. The first one was, my God, aliens exist. The second one, the abductions must take place. And the third one, this explains mysteries from history. But I do remember feeling overwhelmed and almost a feeling of love towards this thing. It wasn't frightening. It was quite the opposite. Recently, I read a report where somebody was on about a love bomb. That these people who have met other aliens and stuff, they have this sort of feeling of love and affection at points, and they describe it as being like a love bomb, which I thought was an interesting statement. That's how I felt on the night, because people say, weren't you frightened? No, totally opposite. It was just absolutely fantastic. I mean, I'm not really religious, but I still say it was like meeting God in a way. It was just the way you felt. It was just so incredible. So that was the three thoughts, and then I had the three close images of the details of the craft, which I now believe was telepathy from those on board the craft, which took me a while to take on board and not freak out about, to be honest. It was quite once I realised, I think that's what took place, and it wasn't an out-of-body experience. It became even more weird, if you like.
And what's interesting, Colin, is when you say the car, was it your neighbor's car that arrived before yours, and you're like,
Yes.
how did they not see it? I had a spiritual teacher teach me, if you took a room full of people and said, hey, there's a UFO outside in the parking lot, half would see it that are open to it, and the half that don't believe it exists would not see it because their mind's filters would not allow them to see it. So that may be why when you say, I don't know how they didn't see it, they may not have had filters that would allow them to see it.
Yeah, it's very strange, like, because I have a feeling that they were waiting for us. It wasn't just being in the right place at the right time. It was meant to happen. They was in control of the situation, and they made it happen. Most people see UFOs at a distance. It's very rare you get to see one close up. Now, David Jacobs always says that if you see a UFO at treetop height, 100 feet away from you, it is always an abduction case. But we've got no memories of any abductions taking place. But it was certainly, as I've learned over the last 25 years, I've not met many people who have been so close to triangles that we have. There's a few in the book, actually, who have been closer. There's some who've actually touched a triangle. So there are a few of us who do get these close encounters, but they are always in control of the situation. And I'm sure it is done on purpose to the people they choose to do it to. I don't know why they do that, but they do. And I believe they were waiting for us that night. In fact, I have a little theory. Because we drew pictures of what we saw, and my wife drew 3 red circles in a perfect triangle, a perfect equilateral triangle, like the 3 red lights in these corners. Now, there's no way we could have seen that from the position that we was driving up the Frost Way towards the craft. What we saw was the craft tilted towards us and tilted at an angle, which I think gave us an even better view of all the lights. Now, like I said, when we jumped out, there was a large craft going away from us, the one the size of a football pitch. Now, if you look at the trajectory of the one that was flying away from us, the big one, then that would have come over the car. And I have a wonder whether my wife actually looked up and seen the underneath of the large craft, whilst the other 3 of us were looking at the small craft in the field. If you think of the small craft as being the bait, we were absolutely gobsmacked at this small craft and the amount of lights. I mean, it was absolutely made sure you could see it. I even believe it was tilted up so that it could expose more of the lights to us as we were driving towards it. Now, is that the case that they wanted us to do that and to stare at that whilst the larger craft came over the top of the car? And that's what my wife drew, the 3 red lights of the underneath of the large triangle, because there's no way we could have drawn 3 red lights from what we saw of the small craft in the field next to us, because it just all mingled up. We never got to see it in that sort of aspect ratio, if you like. So there is a thought that it was an ambush. I am absolutely convinced it was done on purpose, that we just didn't happen to come across it. It was there waiting for us. But why? I don't know. I thought it was to build the models and to write the book and to spread the word. But it just, I mean, I've done that, but nothing changes. You know what I mean? I'm still sitting here. I still have to go to work. I'm still leading a normal life, even though I've had a out of this world experience. And I still can't fathom out why it occurred. I mean, are these things done just really for the individual? Or am I trying to spread the word in a subtle way? Am I part of a disclosure project without knowing it? I don't know.
Yeah. I find it interesting because my daughter had an experience in 2014, I think it was, but she seen above the houses in my mum's neighbours where she was staying at the time an H-shaped craft. She says it was absolutely huge and she couldn't understand why other people weren't seeing it. But then she says that she thinks it might have been a dream because she remembers waking up and thinking, it's a few hours later, what the hell happened? Type of thing. So she doesn't know whether it was a dream or whether she actually seen it, but I googled it at the time, and apparently in 2014 there had been a sighting of about 3 or 4 different, in different locations of an H-shaped UFO.
Like Michael was saying earlier, some people see these UFOs and people standing next to them probably won't see them at all, which is a strange part of the whole phenomenon of UFOs.
Yeah, I mean, now she's convinced herself it hasn't happened, because she's very skeptical about everything paranormal and everything, even though she's experienced a few things. But she, like I say, she's convinced herself she doesn't want to know. So I think it must have somehow scared her. So.
Yes. Now I've got an account in the book of a girl locally in Burbage, just down the road from us, she came home from work late at night and went into the back garden to have a cigarette, and she saw these 3 lights coming towards her and assumed it was a helicopter. But it came into the garden, at the bottom of the garden. By that time, she could see it was a triangular-shaped craft, and it tilted up in front of her and did a certain, like she said, like a J-shape sort of maneuver. And then she ran in the house scared because she was worried about being abducted. Now, that was the first sort of story that she told me about it. Then we met and had a coffee in town at Costa Coffee in Hinckley and got chatting. And she said that she'd been thinking about it and she spoke to her family about it. But what she'd forgotten was, and this has all brought it back to her, that when the craft tilted up in front of her at the bottom of the garden, and there was a glass dome underneath, and she could see 2 aliens inside this glass dome looking at her. And that's at the point where she got really scared and went in the house. Mm-hmm. Now, if I had not got in touch with her and followed it up a little bit, then maybe she would not have recalled the fact, because she'd forgotten that she'd seen these 2 aliens. She perhaps just wiped it out of her mind, to the back of her mind. But with me talking to her and then her talking to her family, it brought it back to her that she did actually see a couple of aliens that particular night. Oh. So, yeah, there is a case that people can block these things out of the minds. I mean, for me, it's been the other way. Rather than trying to ignore it, I sort of ran with it, and I just can't stop being involved in it. I find it absolutely fascinating.
Yeah.
So I was just thinking too, another flip side of it is she may not want to remember because of the stigma society puts on people who claim to see UFOs, that she may not want that. So she may say, no, I didn't see it.
That's right. Yeah. That's a funny thing from my own experience, that right from day one, I've told people about what took place and everybody's gone with it. Nobody has really knocked it or poo-pooed the idea that I'm making it up or anything like this. And a lot of people, it's been really encouraging and said, because it's you, we believe you, because we know your integrity, and we know you're not going to be telling lies. Now, I've been doing this now for nearly 25 years. And just recently, when I wrote the book, I thought this is going to cause problems because I talk about having telepathy with aliens, and I thought anybody locally reading that's going to think I'm crackers. But it's quite the opposite. I've become quite a star in the local village now where I live. People will talk to me, but nobody takes the mickey out of me, which is incredible, really. So I think public awareness of this thing is getting greater and greater all the time as we head towards, hopefully, disclosure at some point.
Yeah. So do you think these beings that run these crafts, if they're from a different civilization, or do you think they're from inner space, outer space? Because there's been,
I think they're dimensional, absolutely dimensional, 100%. As I was saying earlier, after the UFO event, I had lots of paranormal experiences. I started writing down the dates and what took place. Now, I've put all those into the book as well. And after a couple of years, they sort of faded away. But prior to the UFO experience, I had nothing that I can remember happening. No ghosts, no UFOs, no weird stuff. It was only after that big event that I started to have other things happen. Now, for instance, one of them was at the river. I touched on this earlier when I was fishing. I heard what sounded like 4 footsteps coming across the field towards me. So I climbed up the riverbank to let them know I was there, because it's out in the countryside, and sometimes you get some of the farmhands shooting. So I didn't want them shooting in my direction. So I climbed up onto the riverbank, but there was nobody there. But the noise continued. It's walking towards me. It's 4 heavy footsteps, almost like an invisible elephant. It's making that much noise. So what I do, I think it's a cat. That's my first thought, that it's a big cat that somebody's let out in the countryside. So in my rod holder, I've got a spike that I use for my fishing umbrella. So I take the spike, and I'm thinking, what I'll do, if it is a big cat, I'm going to go back down the riverbank, get it to jump on me, and impale it using its own weight on this spike. That was my game plan for survival. I was that frightened. Yeah. And this thing walked towards me, but no grass was moving, and I couldn't see anything. And it walked right in front from left to right. And as it went past, I started shouting and clapping my hands and whacking the stick on the ground, but nothing came out. It just faded away. And that was the day that I decided that this UFO had to be dimensional, because what I'd just experienced at the riverbank wasn't actually there in our real space and time. It was very close, unless it was a cloaked being of some sort, but I believe it was another dimension just overlapping a little bit. So I'm 100% convinced that these things are dimensional. Now, after the UFO event, like I said, the telepathy that I believe now that I had from the aliens must have opened up something in my mind to allow these other things to come through, because none of the other family were having these experiences. It was only me that was having these weird extra experiences.
Mhm.
So as far as I'm concerned, yeah, it's another dimension running alongside our own, and that's where these are coming from. So when you see lights and things on these craft, I don't think they're lights. I think there's some sort of propulsion system that's changing the frequency to get them to come from one dimension to another. Because people often say, "Why have they got lights on them?" and stuff like that. I don't think that's the case. Yeah, I am 100% convinced that these are dimensional. They are not extraterrestrial as such.
Mm-hmm.
If that had been from another planet and we'd have seen it that night, it would have just disappeared, and that would be the end of it. We'd never see anything else ever again. But because of all the extra activity, then I know that this thing is dimensional, absolutely 100%.
Wow. That's really interesting.
So we have a question from the chat group. Matt is asking, Colin, do you think space and time stopped during the encounter?
Good question. Unfortunately, we don't know what time we left the pub. We know it was 9:50 p.m. when we checked the watch after the event. So there is a possibility that there could have been some missing time in there, or time stopped. But we have no recollection. I have to say no, we don't know anything about that. I do have a report of a friend, a guy I've interviewed myself in Hinckley, who drove his motorcycle from Nuneaton to Hinckley on a Sunday night. He left Nuneaton at 11 o'clock and he got home about 1:30. His bike stopped on the main road and a triangle came over the top of him. He said it was 1.5 times the size of a football pitch.
Wow.
He said just incredible. He looked up at it. He said a third of the way down underneath there was a glass dome. And this was coming over a large building that Transco used for controlling the gas all over. Still there? Oh yeah, I'm back on again. So he lost 1.5 hours of time, just like that, and he's got no recollection of being abducted or anything like that. As far as he's concerned, his motorbike. So can you still hear me okay?
You're starting to lag a little bit, but yeah, we can still hear you.
Good.
So Matt is asking, have you ever considered hypnosis to try and gain more information regarding your experience?
Yes, I tried it once in the UK with a guy I just randomly picked out of the book that had nothing to do with UFOs, but nothing came from that. I didn't seem to be able to be hypnotized. So a few years ago, I went to a UFO conference in America. I went to Laughlin in Nevada, and I met a lady there. I think it was Barbara Lamb, who was quite famous in the UFO world for doing regressions. So I went to her room to be request. She sat in the bed, I sat in a chair, and she asked me to go through what had occurred tonight. And I was telling her about the experience. And then lo and behold, she starts snoring. I mean, she fell asleep. It looked like I'd hypnotized her instead of the other way around. It was like 3, 2, 1 back in the room. And she goes, oh, sorry, it's been a tiring weekend. But I don't feel I was hypnotized at all. Nothing happened. It still cost me $80, but I didn't get anything out of it. So it's a good question. I have tried it a couple of times. I don't seem to be able to be hypnotized. I would like to actually be regressed to see if I can get anything more out of the experience that night, because there might be more to it than what we know. at least from what I've learned over the years, I mean, it sounds crazy, doesn't it, when people say, I was abducted, but they've wiped my mind clear of everything that took place. And you think, well, that's very convenient. And the only way you can get it back is through hypnosis. It doesn't sound like it's real, but after you've researched these things for all these years, you find out that that's actually the case. They seem to be able to put these blockages into your mind to stop you from remembering things. Either that's for your own good or for their own good. I don't know. But yeah, I think there could be more in there, definitely.
So do you think we're any closer to disclosure, especially the way that the media is starting to drip feed we're lately?
Yes, we're getting there slowly. I mean, over the last 25 years, it's becoming a bit more mainstream. But what is encouraging, what I'm starting to hear more and more, and if you listen to David Grush, what he was saying, he said the same thing. They're not coming from another planet, they're coming from another dimension.
Yeah.
He seems to be singing that same tune now. And people who have these other things happen to them, like myself and people in the book, they even call that now the hitchhiker effect. They've got a name for it. So all the stuff I kept hidden for a while, I then started talking about, is now becoming more and more mainstream. And you can see from my own book that the people who've had experiences go on to have other experiences as well. And with the top people talking about that, I think we are starting to get closer. But it's not as simple as aliens coming from another planet to visit us and to make our life better. I think these have been around for a long, long time. God knows what they've been doing to us over all those years, but I don't know if it's going to be good or bad. We'll find out one day, hopefully.
Yeah. I'm curious, Colin, if you've ever thought about, because you asked why you were picked to have the experience, if it's because of your drafting. Because as a draftsman, your mind is more picked up to pick up the details, and I have a drafting background too, and one of the aspects that I commonly say is like we'll take what the engineers and architects design and actually make it work. We're the ones that figure out what, like if it's 30 feet, how can we actually make it 30 feet, because we know there's tolerances and we think outside the box to make it work, to where they figured your outside of the box thinking, you would be the right one to draw and make this. And so that's why they contacted you.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's a combination of things. I think certainly the drafting skills, because I've been a draftsman all of my life and I've done some good drawings, I have to say, in my time, especially in the aircraft industry. And also being AutoCAD User of the Year 1992 is quite an accolade for computer-aided design. Now, if you remember early on, I talked about when I used to work in Aberdeen, I'd had a few offshore trips to an oil platform. So when you get on an oil platform, you're there for 5 days. You've got to do all your drawings, get everything right. Then when you fly back to Aberdeen, get back to the drawing office, you need to draw it up and make proper records. And you've got to get it right. Now, if you've missed something, you can't just hop on the next helicopter and fly back out to the platform. It doesn't work like that. You need accommodation and everything. It just doesn't happen. You've got to make sure everything is done 100% correct before you leave that platform. I mean, you're being paid a lot of money to do that. So you go over the work time and time again, and you know exactly what everything that's you need to know. And then when you get back to the drawing office, you draw it up straight away and make a proper record of what you've seen. So on the night of the UFO, the same sort of thing. The detail of the beams and the interlocking, the liquid surface, the lights, the flickering of the lights, everything about the vaporization on the bottom corners, all that information I stored into my head as much as I could. Then as soon as I got back, as soon as I got inside, I was starting to do drawings and make images and write everything down that I'd seen, the same as I would do on an engineering project. Also, I've not been in the army, so I've not signed the Official Secrets Act, and I'm not a member of Parliament. I'm not somebody who can't talk. I'm somebody who can talk. I'm just an electrical design draftsman by trade. So I can sit here and spout on about it with impunity, if you like. So maybe that's another reason why they chose me, because they knew I would take this model and show people. I mean, this model, I have to say, is almost an exact copy of what we saw that night. it makes me shake when I look at it sometimes. You know, it's just incredible. But yeah, I think the only reason I could think that they chose me was they knew I was going to build the craft, knew I was going to do the drawings, and they knew I'd be sitting here doing podcasts, spreading the word, rather than just hiding away and keeping it to myself, which I couldn't do. The funny thing was, it was the 31st of March. So the very next day was April Fool's Day here in the UK. So I was trying to tell people first thing in the morning what we'd seen the night before. It just made my job a little bit more difficult. And I was thinking, have these aliens got a sense of humour? I don't think that. I think that was just coincidence, to be honest.
Yeah. So do you think that you would do anything different if you had that same kind of experience again?
Yeah, if I could have done, I would have made the wife stop the car where it was and got out, rather than pulling in front of the hedge so it disappeared. Whether it would have stayed there if we'd have kept our eyes on it and got out of the car or not, I don't know. But it's true to say that me and my mother-in-law, we would have got on board. We were that excited. We weren't frightened at all. But my wife and my daughter, they were a bit nervous. They weren't quite so keen on getting on board. But that's the only thing we could have changed, really, is getting out the car sooner to get a closer look and to get even closer to it, or even get on board. It would have been fantastic. It was just, I mean, I've seen a lot of aircraft over the year and also other engineering projects I've been involved with, but I've never seen anything quite as amazing as this triangle. I mean, it was, where it had been manufactured, it was squeaky clean. It looked like it had just come out of the showroom. It was like it was brand new. You know what I mean? Like a brand new car that's only done 10 miles. It was just, everything about it was just amazing piece of kit. The way it had been put together, the way it manoeuvred, fantastic, absolutely fantastic.
Oh.
I have a slight theory as well, actually, that a friend of mine sent me a video of a guy doing a lecture on quantum levitation, and basically it got me thinking. So I came up with this idea. The surface of the craft, you can see, is like a liquid surface. It looked like liquid mercury that was running up and down the surface of the craft. Can't quite get it on the camera there. But if, for instance, this liquid is something like liquid nitrogen, these silver beams on top of the craft, they may well go through that skin and immerse into that liquid themselves. All of those beams then would be cooled down to 0 degrees Kelvin, and there would be superconductors, both top and bottom. So the craft is now become one big superconductor. And once you have superconductivity, you've got quantum levitation. And that produces its own magnetic field, which then interacts with the Earth's magnetic field. So it can just sit there and just hover with no engines, no propulsion system, no nothing. Just the fact that it's cold and it's producing a magnetic field. Now that would make sense, because when the craft materialized, these bottom two wingtips had small clouds, fluffy white clouds appear around them, vaporization. So these 3 points of the triangle are like the points of least resistance. So as the craft materialized, there was obviously a lot of coldness there, and the 3 points of the craft had these fluffy white clouds on them. Now, as we were looking at the rear end, then the nose was tilted down slightly. So, like so, that this is how it looked before the craft materialized. So I could see this little red light at the front underneath here, which had got like a vapor around it. And that one looked like a ball of plasma. It looked different to these four at the back. I couldn't understand what it was when I was looking at it, but subsequently, having built the model and done research, I realised now I was looking at this one underneath, which is a different type of light. It's more like a Roman candle burning, like a ball of plasma, whereas the ones on the back were just like a solid red light with crisscrosses on them. But I could see, like I say, a misty effect around this little ball of plasma at the front, and also around the rear two wingtips. There was like a cloud effect around there as well. So that's part of my theory. Now, a lot of triangles are reported as having like refrigerator pipes running up and down them. So in the case where they've got pipes, I assume the liquid is running through the pipework, and the pipework itself becomes superconductors. Whereas these are beams immersing into a liquid to make them into superconductors. So that's just a theory I've got on part of the propulsion system of these craft.
That's pretty cool.
That is, and it's kind of interesting too that you say that it had like the cloud effect on the two wingtips, because I've read a lot of accounts where some of the UFOs, when they want to leave, will generate a cloud. So then you just don't even realize you just are like, oh, they're gone, and they may be there. They're just hiding in, like, kind of camouflaging themselves in our atmosphere to then disappear. And so I'm kind of wondering, could it maybe be that as you were approaching the hedge, they might have been forming that cloud, and that's why it disappeared on you?
Yeah, it formed the cloud as it was appearing, but it may just have cloaked itself again and turned the lights out as well. For we knew, we could have been standing right in front of it without realizing it. As I say, we knew nothing about UFOs at the time. We just assumed it had gone. But looking back on it, it could have just decloaked and turned the lights off and still be there. We wouldn't have known it because it was just an amazing piece of equipment. The technology was just out of this world.
Yeah. And so Matt is asking, do you think the UK military is aware of their airspace being invaded by these crafts that can cloak and manifest like you're saying?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it was such an amazing experience on the evening, the night. The next day, when I started to think about it, I started to get a bit worried, a bit concerned. I thought I'd seen too much. And I realised that the very next day, I realised that I am not special. I am not the only person who's seen these triangles or seen a flying saucer. That all these reports you hear of over the years are going to be true. And if I've seen them, there's a pretty good chance that the military have seen them. Well, absolutely 100% chance that the military have seen them, and they are aware of them, and far more than what we are aware of them. So, yeah, the military knows that they're here, but whether they understand exactly what's going on or not, I don't know. We're not privy to that information. Certainly not as clear cut as everybody believes.
Yeah. I'm curious, has Nick Pope reached out to you? Because he seems to be like a high echelon in the UK. Wasn't he a defense minister in the UK? And he's doing
Well,
stuff
Jay,
about...
there seems to be a bit of controversy about him at the moment, that people are calling him a little bit. I've met Nick a few times, and we've been on television together. He did say that the model was an exact copy of a UFO that was reported to him over 2 RAF bases, RAF Shawbury and another air base, I can't bring it to mind at the time, about the same time as well, in 1999. So he did confirm on television that the craft that I'd built, the model that I'd made, had been seen by RAF personnel in 2 different locations in the UK around the same time that we had our sighting. So we did sort of confirm that. That's the only dealings I've had with Nick. I pass don't cross very often these days. I believe he's in America now at the Skinwalker branch, involved with that. So one thing I was going to say about the craft being cold, I mean, that is just my idea. That doesn't mean that's true. And the reason I say that is because I've got people who have touched the triangle. Now, if this craft was super cold and they touched it, it would have frozen their hands that much they would have probably dropped off. So I'd like to read you one if you don't mind. It's just a short passage. This is a guy called Charles B. He said he'd been out chasing a triangle with his daughter. So I'll just read you a quick passage from here. He said he was out with his daughter and they thought it was a helicopter. Somewhere between Cleesby and Manfield, we lost sight of it as it got too low. We looked for the object but decided to go up and turn back home. As we drove along the A67, I said, let's look down by the river at Low Coniscliffe. He says, with hindsight, I think they told me it was there. After driving down the track to the river, the triangle was probably about 300 feet above the ground level. It was huge, at least 1,000 feet across. The lights at the apices were dim yellow-orange, and there was a dim orange light in the body towards the back. I got out of the car and stood staring at the triangle. There was total silence. I could no longer even hear the traffic from the nearby A1M motorway. The body was black and it blocked out the stars, but I could see stars around it and also a nearby farmhouse on the hill of the river. It also seemed to block out the breeze. I don't know whether I got closer to it or it to me, but I seemed right underneath it. I could see black channels etched in the underside of it, which you have now made me think of a docking mechanism. It seemed to be made of a slate or graphite material, very dark grey and a smooth matte texture. I could feel the presence in my whole body, and a dental implant was vibrating in my mouth. I could see the channels covered the underside of the craft. They're probably 6 feet across and of a similar depth. I raised my hands and touched part of the craft's body between the channels. I was terrified and even thought it could harm me, but I did it anyway. I brushed my fingers over it and then put my entire palm on it. It felt like a hard kitchen worktop with a matte finish, but it was not cold. The next thing I remember is my daughter shouting me to come back into the car. She hadn't wanted to get out of the car. So there's an amazing account there of a triangle of 1,000 foot across coming down to the head height of a guy. Now this guy is a personal protection officer. He's not somebody to make up stories. And he stretches up and touches the underneath of the craft. The point I'm making about this is that although I feel the craft may be really a superconductor and extremely cold, it can't really be if this guy's touched his hand underneath it. He's not experienced any coldness from the craft itself. But we could be looking at different types of craft, obviously. But that was one of the accounts in there I found amazing, to be honest. There's quite a lot of interesting accounts in there. There's one of a lady who, with a friend, went across to a triangle, a pyramid-shaped object that landed in a field, in the local football field late at night, covered in mist again, maybe vapour, and there was coloured lights inside it. And she said the craft, if they walked towards it, it was just about a foot off the ground, but it was translucent. It looked like it was trying to come through, if you like. And they said they walked towards it and it would back off. So they walked away and it would come back to its original position. And she said at one point it became a solid object, and said it was metallic, and on the sides of it was these hieroglyphs, the Egyptian hieroglyphs. There was a picture of a man with a bird's head carrying a spear on the side of this triangle, and then they got scared and they went off. They came back half an hour later and it had disappeared. But she phoned me a couple of times to talk about this, ever so excited. And I have no reason to disbelieve her. So now we've got a connection between Egyptians and modern day triangles. So when I said earlier, I think these things have been around for a long time. I think they've been around for a long, long time, very long time. There's some great stories in the book, I have to say.
Yeah.
So if anybody's looking interested, here's the book itself, Triangular UFOs of the United Kingdom by Colin Saunders, available on Amazon. There's a hardback, paperback, and Kindle and audiobook as well.
Yeah, I'll definitely have to be buying that one.
I'm kind of curious, Colin, of your personal opinion of when you say like she saw the Egyptian hieroglyphs and probably the god Thoth being the ibis head god. Do you think the Egyptian gods may be extraterrestrials that chose to live among us and help us? Or do you feel like they just were aware of the aliens and worked with them?
I think the latter, if I had to make a guess, that they were aware of the aliens and they worked with them. I mean, we're never going to know, are we? We're speculating, but I do believe they were around at that point, yeah. And if they've got their markings on the side of the craft, there's obviously a big tie-in between the population at the time and aliens. Yeah, it's mind-blowing, isn't it, when you start thinking about it?
It is, because all the major pyramid structures that are around are all lined up with constellations. And we have to sit there and think, who on Earth could look up in the sky and say, okay, we got to line up this building here, this big, and this building this big here. because we got to match these stars, because you would only know that looking down. You would not be able to look up and go, okay, yeah, this is the right spot.
Yeah, it's amazing, and the amount of effort and time that went into building those things. It does make you wonder. It does. I certainly think they've had a hand in a lot of these things. I mean, I'm fascinated by these brick walls that you see around the world that have been built so tight that you can't get a cigarette paper in between the slabs. And it looks like the rock's been melted into position. Like, it's just incredible how they had that technology. We can't do that today. So how did they do that, thousands of years ago? But like I say, on the night of the encounter, one of the thoughts I had was that these beings, these creatures, have been around for a long, long time. I don't like to call them aliens as such, but they are a form of life. We need to respect that. Hopefully they respect ours as well. We'll find out.
I venture to think we have, because I like to think like others, going, if the aliens or extraterrestrials were going to take us over, they surely would have done it when we were walking around with sticks.
Yeah, maybe that's not the game plan. Maybe they don't want to take us over. Maybe they just want to come down and take a few individuals now and again and never bring them back. Because you do hear of people never returning from wherever, these national parks and things, people disappearing. You hear all sorts of rumours, don't you? But until you see stuff, you're never really going to know. You hear rumours that body parts have been seen on board spaceships. If that's the case, then we do have to worry about what's going on. Are they harvesting humans in the way that they harvest cattle? The cattle mutilations. I'm sure that's down to them.
Yeah. Do you think that Bigfoot sightings have got something to do with obviously interdimensional beings and UFOs?
Yeah. It's almost an old cliche, isn't it? Saying there's two sides of the fence. I mean, I had a friend who'd seen a UFO, but I didn't believe it 100%. I didn't disbelieve him, but I needed to see it myself.
Yeah.
And I think everybody does need to see it yourself to believe. Now, after that particular night and all the things that happened to me, that has opened my mind up so much now to the things that go on in the world, that anything is possible. So, yes, I believe the Loch Ness Monster and Yetis, and Bigfoot, they exist. They may well be dimensional creatures as well, that come and go at will. I mean, that would be, if you could do that, that would be a great way of getting away from your enemies, wouldn't it? If you're being chased by a herd of wild dogs and you just disappear to another dimension, So are they coming and going? Is Nessie coming and going? I've got an open mind to all of these things. Now, I wouldn't disbelieve anything. I mean, I've had local people in the village where I live now come and tell me they've had fairies in the bedrooms, like sitting on the end of the table looking at them. And with people who tell me these stories, I ask them again a few years later, and you can tell if they're lying or not, because they tell you exactly the same story. It was the same colour, the same size, did the same things. And I guess because I've been very open about my experience, people are quite open in talking to me about what they've seen. Yeah. So anything that anybody sees locally, they always go, "Oh, you want to tell Colin about that?" People are telling me what they've seen. There's old boys coming up telling me they've seen UFOs over the school, 40, 50 years ago. It's amazing. It's amazing what's going on. And I do take it all on, but I do keep an open mind on everything. I wouldn't say that nothing's impossible from what I've seen.
Yeah. So I'm kind of curious, with the 4 engines on the back and possibly 3 on the bottom, do you think that with them being interdimensional, they travel through wormholes, or can they create like a little time-space bubble and just pop in and pop out?
I would say they just create a space-time bubble of their own and pop in and pop out. I don't think they would need to go to a certain area. I don't know. I wouldn't say I was an expert. Why would one area be more easy to come across than another? There might be an explanation for it, but I think it's more likely that they will come out wherever they want to come out and go back to wherever they want to go back to, because they're just going from one dimension to another at any point that they want in in their universe. It is weird to think about it, isn't it? I mean, I often think like they're dimensional, and now I am convinced. So, is there another Earth like ours running alongside? I bet there is. That's running at a different atomic level. It's vibrating at a different level. So, does that mean that everything we've got here, all of our planets and solar system, is that replicated at a lower level, at a different frequency, so that these beings are living in the same sort of universe as ourselves, but at a different level, so that if we were to travel over to there, we'd still see a moon and Venus and Mars, and I just don't know. And who chooses, who flies these things, who manufactures them? Do they stay at home? Do they have shops? Do they have a police force? Do they need a police force? Loads and loads of questions about what's going on. It's just,
yeah,
you can do your head in if you think about it too much. It's just absolutely incredible. But I know it all exists. It is there. It is all happening.
it's certainly interesting.
I think it's going to take a lot for people to take on board. I mean, it's taken me a long time. Now, people talk about time travel. I'm still struggling with that one to try and take that on board. How people can travel through time. I mean, it may be possible. It took me a while to get my head around dimensions, but to put time in there as well. I don't know. I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah.
I think it's possible by accessing memories and maybe certain like DNA, because they say we're double helix, but then you hear of they're now saying, well, we have like 9 or 10 strands of DNA, but only 2 are working and the rest are junk. And I'm like, I don't think we have junk DNA. I think those are our gifted side. And as we activate those DNA strands, we'll be able to traverse time and space, maybe, and traverse dimensions. But I think it's a matter of awareness and perception and how much belief we have in our own selves that will either activate or keep those strands dull and going, nope, they're just sitting there to sit there.
Yeah, I do know. I do think there's a lot more that we can use of our brain, having had what I think is telepathy, than had these other experiences. I mean, it's all coming through the brain. That the brain has seen these things and perceived these things. And like I say, perhaps 2 people standing there, one will see them, one won't. So there are parts of our brain and maybe our DNA that still needs activating. I did read once that they tend to pick on people who are already telepathic, which would make sense in a way, wouldn't it? If you want to communicate, like if you go abroad, for instance, and you find somebody in the restaurant who speaks English, you're going to want to talk to them because it's always nice to speak to somebody in your own language. It makes it easier to get along. So do they choose people who are possibly telepathic, or the ability to be telepathic rather than, because there were 4 of us in the car that night, and it was only me who seemed to have the strange close viewing. So I don't know. I'm not saying I'm telepathic, but maybe I am. I don't know. Who knows?
Yeah. Michael, any more questions?
Not on the top of my head, no.
Right. Obviously, I'm quite aware of time because we had to do it a bit early tonight. So, Colin, do you want to tell everybody where they can find you if they get in touch with you?
Yeah, if anybody wants to get in touch with me, you get in touch on Facebook. Is probably the easiest way. You can send me a message through Messenger. I won't give out my email address because I use that for business a lot, so I don't want to get that out there. Okay. And like I say, if you want to buy the book, it is on Amazon, Triangular UFOs, the United Kingdom. But if you want to chat to me, if you've had an experience and you want to message me about it, I'd be really interested in that. Yeah, if anybody wants to have a chat. I know when I had in the early days, I found it quite, in a way, some parts of it stressful, but there were nobody to talk to. You know what I mean? There was no cohesive UFO groups or nobody to report it to. And you're alone with it, and you can feel quite stressed with it all, to be honest. So if there's anybody out there who's stressed, who's had an encounter and they want to talk, get in touch and we'll have a chat, put you at ease.
That's brilliant.
Right. And the flip side of that too, Colin, was even some of the groups you would join and you would say, yeah, I had this experience. Some of the people would be like, no, that doesn't sound right. And they would discount their experience. And I was like, how do you discount someone's experience because it doesn't fit your perception? And so I think that was the other thing that why people stay quiet is because they're like, well, this doesn't sound like their experience, so they won't like it.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, if I had $1 for everybody, every time somebody had said it's TR3B, I'd be a rich man now. I get annoyed with people saying that all the time. You know, I'm just fed up of hearing about the TR3B, the alleged TR3B. I'm sure we are trying to build something, but I don't know if it's out there yet. And it certainly wasn't what we saw that night.
Yeah.
And if anybody thinks it's a TR3B, then just think like I've got 130 different sightings, and they are different size triangles with different lights and different colours. They're not all black. There's green, there's yellow, there's silver, there's gold triangles, there's different coloured lights. You know, you would not be manufacturing that amount of triangles in Area 51. It just wouldn't make sense, you know, production sense. Every craft you build, like, you know, the F117 or the B2, the stealth fighters and bombers, they don't build that many of them, and you need a crew of people to maintain them, and you need spare parts. You need to keep those things flying. It takes a lot of logistics. So you don't go changing and having 130 different types of triangles. And this is just in the UK, because to try and service them and keep them flying, you know, from a human point of view, just wouldn't happen. You wouldn't be able to keep that secret. It's just be too much. So, yeah, if you think this is a TR3B, you're crazy. It's just not. It's just not.
Cool. And anyway, I want to thank you very much for coming on, and it's been very, very interesting. But I'm sure that people that are watching who's had own experience will want to go in touch with you soon. So again, thank you. And Michael?
Yeah, I want to thank you for sharing your experience and the stories. And I appreciate everyone in the chat group who was commenting and sharing their experiences as well. And I just want to thank everybody who joined us at this early hour. I know we're a few hours ahead of our normal time, but we were happy to do it and glad that it all worked out.
Yes, we got there in the end over the technical issues. So it's been great chatting to you. Thanks for having me on your show. And I hope you make many more podcasts and have great success. It's been lovely chatting to you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Just want to say good night, everybody, and when we're back on, Michael?
We are back on, you would ask me that, October 12th with Nicola Phillips.
Okay. So we'll see you on October the 12th, and thank you for everybody that's been, and we'll see you then.
All right. Good night, everyone, or
Bye.
good afternoon, or good morning. Bye-bye. Thank you for joining us at Paranormal Versus. Hope to see you on our next episode.